Very good morning to all of you. So today the class will be on smoking in periodontal diseases and halitosis. So these are two chapters combined in one lecture. So we will go about with the learning outcomes. So at the end of this session, we would like you to know how to classify smokers, explain the effects of smoking on periodontal structures, communicate with patients about the ill effects of smoking, and plan a smoking cessation program based on the accepted guidelines. The contents of this lecture or this part of the class includes introduction, smoke and its constituents, effects of smoking on the prevalence and severity of the periodontal disease, and next is on the etiology and the pathogenesis of the periodontal disease, and next is on the response to the periodontal therapy, and then we'll finish it with smoking cessation. To start with, tobacco smoking has a devastating effect on health and well-being of the public, and this remains the nation's leading avoidable cause of premature mortality and disability. It is also well established that cigarette smoking is a major risk factor in the incidence and severity of several forms of periodontal disease. Tobacco smoking is a risk factor that acts either independently or may have a synergistic way with other risk factors as well. Coming on to the classification of the smokers, using the criteria established by the CDC, that is Center for Disease Control and Prevention, smokers have been classified as current, former and non-smokers. Current smokers are those who had smoked 100 or more cigarettes over their lifetime and had been smoking at the time of interview also. Former smokers, they had smoked 100 or more cigarettes in their lifetime but they were not currently smoking, whereas non-smokers are those who had not smoked 100 or more cigarettes in their lifetime. So even if he had smoked one or two, we don't categorize them as totally this. So less than 100, they are considered to be non-smokers. Coming on to the term called as pack years, so this is a formula which is done to find out or measure the way the smoker's exposure to the tobacco is present. So to start with, you can see that pack years is equal to the number of packs smoked per day by the person into the number of years of smoking. So it is a way to measure a smoker's exposure to tobacco. Higher the exposure means higher the risk for lung cancer. Supposing the patient had smoked one pack per day, and if he has smoked for 30 years, which tells it to be 30 pack years. Supposing he has taken 2 packs per day for 15 years, then he is considered to have 30 pack years. So if he had a smoking history of 30 pack years or more, then he is an eligible candidate for annual lung cancer screening and is more prone for lung cancer. It is always best in clinical practice to gather full information about each patient's smoking history too. So smoke and its constituents. It is smoke constituents have been divided into gaseous and solid components. So gaseous components includes your carbon monoxide, ammonia, formaldehyde, hydrogen cyanide, and 16 known carcinogens. Just remember the term that these are just carcinogens which are cancer producing agents. And solid substances include your nicotine, tar, benzene and benzoprine. Side effects of nicotine are present all over the body, but its main side effects in the gums and the periodontal structures will be dealt in the next few slides. So coming on to the effects of smoking on the prevalence and severity of the periodontal disease. So in case of a person having gingivitis, if he is smoking, you could see less amount of gingival inflammation and reduced bleeding on probing. So you can ask me a question, how that there is reduced bleeding on probing when a person is having a gingivitis condition. Nicotine is a substance which constricts the blood vessels of the gums or the gingiva, and therefore nicotine is a substance which constricts the gingival blood vessels, and therefore there is decreased bleeding on probing in patients with who are smoking having gingivitis. Whereas in the patients who are having periodontitis and if they are a smoker, it has been seen that there is an increased prevalence and severity of periodontal destruction, more pocket depth attachment loss and bone loss, increased rate of periodontal destruction, increased prevalence of severe periodontitis, increased tooth loss, increased prevalence with the increased number of cigarettes smoked per day, decreased prevalence and severity with smoking cessation. Coming on to the effects of smoking on the etiology and the pathogenesis of the periodontal disease. So mainly periodontal diseases is because of two main factors, that is your microbiology, that is your microorganisms, and the immune system of our body, and one more thing is the physiological effects of our body. So if there is going to be any derangement in this, then the periodontal disease are going to be shown outside or they are clinically seen. So how is smoking having an effect on periodontal disease based on these three? So coming on to the microbiological aspects, it has been found that there has been no effect on the rate of plaque accumulation. So studies have been done between smokers and non-smokers, and they had found that the amount of plaque accumulated in smokers and non-smokers is the same and didn't have many major difference in the smokers as such. But they found that there was an increased colonization of shallow periodontal pockets by the pathogens and increased level of periodontal pathogens in deep periodontal pockets. Next, coming on to immunology, altered neutrophil chemotaxis, phagocytosis and oxidative bursts were present. Increased TNF alpha and PGE2 in gingival clavicular fluid were also present. It was also seen that there is increase in neutrophil collagenase and elastase in the GCF, with increased production of PGE2 by monocytes in response to the lipopolysaccharides of the microorganisms, especially the bacteria. Coming on to its physiology, there is decreased blood vessels with increased inflammation, decreased GCF flow and bleeding on probing with increased inflammation, decreased subgingival temperature, and increased time is needed to recover from the local anesthesia. Next, coming on to the effects of smoking on the response to the periodontal therapy. So when comparing, studies were done by the author when they have compared the smokers and non-smokers after giving non-surgical therapy or surgical therapy, and they found that in case of non-surgical therapy there was a decreased response to scaling and root planing in the smokers, decreased reduction in the pocket depth in the smokers, decreased gain in the clinical attachment level in the smokers. Whereas when surgery was done, there was decreased pocket depth, reduction after surgery, and increased deterioration of furcation after surgery, decreased gain in clinical attachment level and bone fill, increased recession and membrane exposure after GTR placement, and decreased pocket depth reduction even after the placement of bone grafts, and decreased pocket reduction and gain in clinical attachment levels after open flap debridement methods. Coming on to the maintenance therapy, so a patient who is a smoker put on maintenance therapy has been shown that there is an increased pocket depth only present even after he has been treated surgically or non-surgically if he is on SPT, and there was a decreased gain in clinical attachment level. Whereas a patient who is a smoker has an increased incidence of recurrent or refractory diseases. There is need for retreatment in the smokers. There is a need for antibiotics in the smokers to control the negative effects of periodontal infection on surgical outcomes, and the tooth loss is more in smokers after surgical therapy. So it is our duty to help the patient to stop smoking. So basically the first thing which we would do is setting a quit date, which has to come from the patient's side, and the patients, it has been found that with the patient's own willpower patients have achieved 3% success only. With self-help materials only 4% success has been achieved, whereas brief intervention programs has given a higher percentage of success rate by means of intervention by 5 A's, which stands for ask, advise, assess, assist and arrange. So what is this? So first A stands for ask. So ask the patient, what do you smoke, how much do you smoke, how long have you smoked, and then advise the patient, that is on the harmful effects, and urge the patient to quit. Assess the patient's willingness to quit. Assess the patient to create a plan for quitting, and arrange a follow-up program within 1 week of the quit date. So this will help in ensuring him in stopping the smoking habit. Apart from this, you do have nicotine replacement therapy. So this is mainly given to combat the effects of nicotine dependence. Generally, smokers are more nicotine dependent, and they do have withdrawal effects when they are going to stop smoking, and therefore to control these withdrawal effects, little amount of nicotine can be inserted into the body by means of patches like this, or by means of gums like this, chewing gums like this. Bupropion drug therapy. This is an antidepressant drug prescribed as 150 milligram once daily for 6 days, followed by 150 milligram twice daily for 7 to 9 weeks. Other methods include counseling, hypnosis, and motivation. Behavioral therapy and acupuncture has also been tried. It is mandatory that smoking cessation should always precede a surgical intervention. If the patient continues to smoke even after your smoking cessation schedules, treatment should be limited only to the non-surgical approach, accompanied by rigorous short intervals, 2 to 3 months maintenance visit until he stops smoking. The next part of this lecture would include oral malodor. So during by the end of this class, we would like you to know the etiology for halitosis, the 5 compounds involved in halitosis, pathogenesis of halitosis, and demonstrate various methods to manage halitosis. Coming on to its contents, we will be going on with definition, importance, categories of halitosis, etiology, detection, treatment, and conclusion. Halitosis is termed as fetor exor or fetor oris or breath malodor. It is a foul or offensive odor emanating from the oral cavity. Jane Linde, on the other hand, he has told that it is an unpleasant odor of the expired air, whatever may be the origin. Next, coming on to the categories of halitosis. So there are 3 different categories of halitosis. Genuine halitosis, it is a term which is used when the breath malodor really exists and can be diagnosed organoleptically or by the measurement of the responsible components. Pseudohalitosis, when an obvious breath malodor can be perceived cannot be perceived, but the patient is convinced that he or she suffers from it, then it is termed as pseudomalodor. So as such, the patient doesn't have any agents leading to malodor, but she believes that she is suffering from malodor, then it is called as pseudohalitosis. Halitophobia is a recognized psychiatric condition where the patient fears having halitosis condition. So what could be the etiology for this? It could be of 2 types, either intraoral causes related to dentition, for example caries, or food getting stuck or food impaction, or it could be because of periodontal infection, or it could be because of dry mouth, that is xerostomia, or it could be because of the tongue and the tongue coating. Extraoral causes because of diseases related to ear, nose and throat, bronchi and lungs, gastrointestinal tract conditions such as Zenker's diverticulum, gastric hernia and regurgitation, liver insufficiency, kidney insufficiency, systemic metabolic disorders such as diabetes mellitus, hormonal causes and medications. So mainly it has been found that the unpleasant smell of the breath originates from the volatile sulfur compounds. So this gives a characteristic smell of rotten eggs. This was first described by Tonashi. The 3 volatile sulfur compounds which gives rise to the malodor is hydrogen sulfide, methyl mercaptan and dimethyl sulfide. Other compounds are also present, which includes diamonds, indole, scatol, butyric or propionic acid, volatile fatty acids such as valerate, butyrate and propionate. Apart from this, when hormonal, gastrointestinal, renal or metabolic pathologies are the cause, additional malodors will also be produced. Halitosis due to local factors which could be pathologic or non-pathologic. Halitosis due to systemic factor, it could be pathologic and non-pathologic again. So again, local factors and systemic factors is the key words here. So we will go about each of these to find out what are the factors which are present, and then if you realize or understand the factors, then your treatment plan can be directed towards reducing these factors. So coming on to halitosis due to local factors of pathologic origin. So it could be because of poor oral hygiene. You could see here calculus and plaque. So because of this, there could be an oral malodor. It could be because of extensive caries. It could be because of periodontitis, open contacts which lodges the food leading to food impaction, Vincent's disease, otherwise necrotizing ulcerative gingivitis, hairy coated tongue, fissured tongue, excessive smoking, healing extraction socket, necrotic tissue from ulceration, or dentigerous cyst with fistula draining into the cavity. So all this could lead to some amount of halitosis. So directly treating them can result in lesser amount of production of the malodor. Next, coming on to halitosis due to local factors of non-pathologic origin. So it could be because of the stagnation of saliva, especially morning breath is due to this reason. Morning bad breath is due to this reason. Odor intensity increases with age. Sometimes acrylic dentures do cause some smell resulting in denture breath. Endodontic patients who are on therapy may have a bad smell. It is because of the seepage of the eugenol or the formocrosol. Next, coming on to the halitosis due to systemic factors of pathologic origin. So there are lots of smells which are present, which has been found by authors after sufficient studies, but these four terms which are highlighted are for you to remember. So if a patient is having a smell of rotten apples, then you could probably come to a conclusion that he has uncontrolled diabetes. So you have to send him for proper testing. So this is mainly because of the accumulation of the ketones. If the patient's smell has a smell of a dead mice, or it has a sweet odor, then the patient could probably have a liver insufficiency. If the patient has a smell of a fish odor or a malodor of fish odor, he could probably have a kidney insufficiency or uremia present. During fever, dehydration, or macroglobulinemia, you do have some amount of odor which is being produced. This is mainly because of the xerostomia with poor oral hygiene and accumulation of toxic waste products. Next, coming on to halitosis due to systemic factor of non-pathologic origin. So metabolites of ingested food excreted through the lungs. Excessive meat eaters, they do have malodor. This is mainly because it contains more protein and they are having more amount of protein diet. Garlic, onion, or alcohol if taken. Alcoholism plus liver cirrhosis could produce halitosis. Hunger periods, we generally do have bad smell when there is hunger present for a long time. This is mainly because of the putrefaction of the pancreatic juice in the stomach. Systemic administration of drugs like isosorbitrate dinitrate, it is because of its end products. Ethyl alcohol, medications containing iodine like iodinated glycerol, it is because of the drug itself. And phenothiazines and its derivatives, it is because of the xerostomia caused by the phenothiazines. So because of all this, you do have a halitosis which are present. So you are supposed to find out why the halitosis is there, whether it is because of the local or systemic factor. So after coming to this conclusion, find out whether it's pathologic or non-pathologic, and then go towards your treatment accordingly. Now coming on to the physiology of malodor detection. So the perception of these molecules depends on the following factors: the odor itself, olfactory response, it can be pleasant, unpleasant, or even repulsive. So a specific concentration before it can be detected. How much is the threshold concentration which is present? The odor power is the extent of concentration, thus must be increased before a judge gives it a higher order score. The volatility of the compound and the substantivity. So all these are required to tell or detect a proper malodor. So mostly allow the patient to self-test themselves to detect the proper malodor. Mostly it is done by these 4 methods: smelling a metallic or a non-odorous plastic spoon after scraping the back of the tongue, smelling a toothpick after introducing it into the intestinal areas, smelling saliva spit in a small cup or a spoon, or licking the wrist and allowing it to dry reflects the saliva contribution to the malodor. So from this the patient will be able to realize that the smell is because of his own oral hygiene condition or related to local factors. So this has to be taught to the patient and explained to the patient. Next, coming on to organoleptic rating. This is another method to detect the malodor. So this is considered to be the gold standard in the examination of the breath malodor. A trained judge sniffs the expired air and assesses or not if this is unpleasant using an intensity scale. This is mainly dependent on the olfactory organs of this clinician. So this scores were given by Rosenberg et al., where he found that he had given a score 0 when there is no appreciable odor, 1 if there is barely noticeable odor, 2 if there is slight or noticeable odor, 3 if there is a moderate odor, 4 if there is a strong odor, 5 if there is an extremely foul odor. So once this perception is made, check out for the etiology and then go about for the treatment plan. Apart from this, you do have other agents which could detect the malodor, like for example gas chromatography of breath samples. So it is being found to be the most informative one. It is extremely sensitive and it is precise. So seeing its size only you can understand this is a little bit expensive and cumbersome, and it's limited only for the research centers. Apart from this, you do have the portable sulfide meter, or otherwise known as the halometer. This can be used in the dental office. The patient is asked to blow through it and you can detect the volatile sulfur compounds. This must be calibrated regularly to maintain its accuracy. Other methods includes the electronic nodes, otherwise known as the oral chroma, dark field or the phase contrast microscopy to detect the bacteria, and the salivary incubation test again to detect the bacteria present involved in. So as I told you, there are 3 categories of halitosis before itself. Miyazaki has come about with the classification of halitosis with the corresponding treatment plans. So as I told you, genuine halitosis is one where there is an obvious malodor which is present. So this has been classified as physiologic and pathologic halitosis, which are intraoral and extraoral causes. So physiologic halitosis could be because of the putrefactive process within the oral cavity, or it could be because of the dorso-posterior region of the tongue coatings, or it could be because of temporary halitosis due to dietary factors like garlic. So in these conditions, just treatment category 1 is sufficient, so which corresponds to explanation of the halitosis and instructions for oral hygiene. So this gains support and reinforcements of patient's own self-care for further improvement of the oral hygiene. Whereas the second category is pathologic halitosis, which has oral and extraoral categories. So oral categories where halitosis could be caused by a disease, a pathologic condition, or a malfunction of the oral tissues. It could be from the tongue coating or modified by conditions such as periodontal disease or xerostomia. So in this case, you could include the treatment category 2 along with 1 where oral prophylaxis, professional cleaning, and treatment for the gum diseases, especially periodontal disease, would be required. The third is your extraoral pathologic halitosis, which includes TN3 category also, where a malodor comes from a lot of extraoral causes, as we had discussed before, that is ear, nose and throat, GIT related, lung related. So for this, along with the treatment 1 category, treatment 3 category, that is referral to the physician or medical specialist, is required. The next one is your pseudohalitosis. So as I told you, the obvious malodor is not perceived by the others, but the patient believes that he is having breath malodor. So for this, proper counseling is required and simple oral hygiene measures. And along with this, explanation of the examination data, further professional instruction, education and reassurance is required. Halitophobia. After treatment for genuine halitosis or pseudohalitosis also, the patient still believes that he is having halitosis. So no physical or social evidence exists to prove that he is having halitosis. For these conditions, along with TN category 1, TN category 5, where a referral to a psychologist, psychiatrist or other psychological specialist is required. So all through these procedures, all through these treatments, TN category 1 is to be implemented along with the other treatment needs. Now coming on to the treatment, so we go through treating the malodor with the help of 4 different strategies. So first is mechanical reduction of the intraoral nutrients and microorganisms, chemical reduction of the oral microbial load, rendering the oral malodorous gases non-volatile, masking the malodor. Okay, coming on to the mechanical reduction of intraoral nutrients and microorganisms. So first one here is that tongue cleaning is very much required. This reduces the amount of coating, that is a nutrient, bacterial nutrients, as well as the number of microorganisms present. So this could be done either with the help of brush or the tongue scrapers. Interdental cleaning and toothbrushing, this forms a mechanical means of dental plaque control. So this has to be reinforced to the person to the patients correctly. Tongue cleaning, interdental cleaning, as well as toothbrushing. A one-stage full mouth disinfection using scaling and root planing and chlorhexidine, application of chlorhexidine is done to reduce the organoleptic levels up to 90%, especially in patients having periodontal infections. Chewing gums may control the bad breath temporarily because it can stimulate the salivary. Next, coming on to the chemical reduction of the oral microbial load. So this is mainly done with the help of oral rinses, where they have found to have antimicrobial agents such as chlorhexidine, cetylpyridium chloride, essential oils, chlorine dioxide, hydrogen peroxide and triclosan, but they have only a temporary reducing effect on the total number of microorganisms in the oral cavity. Rendering the rendering the malodorous gases non-volatile, that is conversion of these volatile sulfide compounds into non-volatile ones. So this can help in reducing the malodor. So this can be done with the help of metal salts. So zinc contains a double positive charge. This binds with sulfur radicals having double negative charge, and this can reduce the expression of the volatile sulfur compounds. Toothpaste such as containing baking soda can have bactericidal effect, as well as it can have transform the volatile sulfide compounds to a non-volatile state. Chewing gums with fluoride and chlorhexidine can also convert the volatile sulfide compounds to a non-volatile state. Last one is the masking of the malodor. This can be done with the help of rinses, mouth sprays, mint containing lozenges containing volatiles with pleasant odor. Chewing gums or increasing the fluid intake can also be done to mask the malodor. Chewing gums acts by lowering the pH of the saliva, which increases the solubility of the volatile sulfur compounds, or they simply increase the secretion of the saliva. So orange juice all has been found to mask the odor, malodor especially. So coming on to the conclusion, so breath malodor has important socioeconomic consequences and can reveal important diseases. A proper diagnosis and determination of etiology allows initiation of proper etiologic treatment. Clinician can either do a trial therapy to deal quickly with intraoral causes, like for example full stage disinfection including the use of proper mouth rinses and toothpaste, or a multidisciplinary consultation. Thank you.